Hello and welcome to Nothing But the Truth. Most people instinctively realize that Narendra Modi's sweeping victory is a major shift in Indian politics. But just how significant is it and what are the changes we can expect? Those are the key issues I shall raise today with one of India's most profound political thinkers, the President of the Centre for Policy Research, Pratap Bhanu Mehta. Dr. Mehta, let's start with Narendra Modi's sweeping victory. How significant is it that after 30 years of a series of coalition and minority governments, we now have a government with a comfortable majority, with the BJP winning 282 seats on its own?
An extraordinary event. I would argue it's the most significant election since independence. It has completely rewritten the rules of Indian politics. It has, given lie to the assumption that we are going to be stuck with coalition governments. It has proved that national leadership actually matters to the political fortunes of a party. And I think what it has demonstrated most importantly is that political creativity, communication, strategy, organization, good old-fashioned political things matter, and that people were hankering for change. It's a historical opportunity in the second sense that it's an extraordinary opportunity now to actually transform India for the better and leave a lasting imprint on the basic structures of governance.
I want very much to talk about the manner in which India could be transformed and what the changes would amount to. But first, let's focus a little on how Mr. Modi's style and personality could actually change the way we view the Prime Ministership, which at the end of the day is the apex of our political structure. Dr. Manmohan Singh was seen as soft-spoken, reticent, gentle. Mr. Modi is almost the opposite in every regard. How will that change how we view the Prime Ministership and how India views political leadership?
See, I think the office of the Prime Minister has two different kinds of leadership functions. One is, of course, somebody has to stand up and say, look, I'm in charge, and explain to the people what the government is doing. And that was sorely lacking the last 5 to 7 years.
And Modi will say
and that comes naturally to Mr. Modi. He's a communicator. He likes to project himself up front and center. I think the second function of the office of the Prime Minister is that it used to be said, he's the keystone in an arch, which is, it's the office that actually determines how other institutions in government function. And the interesting question is whether Mr. Modi is going to use this power in this office to set right that institutional architecture, or is he going to use it to usurp power from that institutional architecture?
Let me in fact pick up on that thought. Mr. Modi is a decisive man. He knows what he wants. He's used to getting it most of the time. Could such a man, with a majority of 282 MPs behind him, tip over from being authoritative and become authoritarian?
He could. I mean, he could. But I think there are three checks and balances against that, which we are underrating. One, the BJP still doesn't have a majority in the Rajya Sabha. So in terms of major constitutional amendments, I think they still have a long way to go. I think second, we are underestimating the fact that what this election demonstrates is that there is a significant amount of the voting population whose preferences are now quite volatile. I mean, the BJP itself went from 28% to 19% back up to 30%. And I think anybody who has sane political instincts understands that they can actually be punished for doing so.
That if they don't deliver on Mr. Modi.
That if he acts sensibly in his own self-interest. And I think the third check is that I think the BJP is actually a bit more of a federal party than we recognize. There are powerful chief ministers, and it's not going to be easy to circumvent all of them all the time.
Now, a third factor about Mr. Modi is that he has his roots in the RSS. He was an RSS pracharak. He's very proud of his RSS affiliation. Some people wonder whether Mr. Modi, as a result, appreciates and understands the many colors, the many strands that make India's rich but sometimes fragile national fabric. Is that another area of some concern?
It is an area of concern, but I'd say I think two things. One, I think Mr. Modi has surprised everybody by, I think, the evolution at least of his own public pronouncements. I think the fact that he repeatedly refers to the Constitution in almost every second or third speech is actually a remarkable political evolution. Now, whether he means it sincerely or not, that will be tested by his actions. But he has demonstrated a remarkable ability to, as it were, change his message. I think the second factor which we may be underrating, or at least we don't know what the outcome of this factor is, that if Mr. Modi now recognizes that what he has an opportunity to do is play the role of a statesman who can go down as somebody who genuinely transformed India for the good, then he's playing a very, very different game than what a conventional RSS imagination is used to. We don't know whether he will want to play that game. He's certainly giving indication in his public pronouncements that he wants to play that game. And hopefully, in a sense, he will rise up to that occasion. But I think he is moving away from that game.
Now, a second sense in which Mr. Modi's sweeping victory signifies a major change and shift is that for the first time, Mr. Modi brings to power a government that is committed, so one believes, to right-wing politics, right-wing policies. In the history of Indian politics, how much of a change will that be?
It is a very significant change. I mean, it's a significant change. I think, and maybe we can talk about both the economic side of it and the cultural and secularism side of it. If I perhaps may begin with the secularism question first. Mr. Modi is certainly not going to play secular politics in the way that we are conventionally used to under Congress regimes. I think there is a genuine fear many people have, and I think this fear is very genuine, that there are significant sections of India's population amongst the minorities who still feel insecure. And I think he will have to address that. There is no getting around that fact. Let us also not deny the fact that his victory seems to have empowered also a bunch of forces, let's say a bunch of nasty people whose prejudices about Muslims and I think whose short-sighted views on Indian history certainly pose a threat to the Indian secular fabric. I think his big challenge will be to, in a sense, overcome these two fears.
You're saying two very important things there. First of all, you're saying that the apprehensions, perhaps even the fears of the minorities and Muslims in particular, are very genuine, and he needs, particularly if he wishes to transform into a statesman, to address these apprehensions and address them quickly and address them clearly.
Yes, they're genuine for one reason, right? One, we have to admit that there has been a larger institutional and legal failure in India of the kind that makes a lot of people insecure about whether they will get justice, about whether institutions will be arbitrary. And I think the big shift that Mr. Modi can bring about, if he's constructive, is not get caught up in the politics of symbolism, but give a commitment that India's public institutions, police, law, judiciary, the institutions that really matter for protecting individual rights, will function in a way that is non-discriminatory, not arbitrary, and will protect every Indian citizen, will not tolerate any intimidation.
This in fact leads to the second issue that I want to raise with you, and it's inherent in your first answer, that the Nehruvian consensus that has dominated India for 65 years is either likely to be amended or maybe replaced with another paradigm. And if, to begin with, in terms of secularism, you find that the concept and the meaning of that term begins to alter under Mr. Modi, would that be a significant turning point?
I actually think the Nehruvian consensus was amended shortly after Nehru, not now, which is to say that Nehru had a vision for India's constitutionalism which was a transformative vision, where identity matters less for what rights you have. We converted that vision into a form of electoral secularism, or a secularism of symbolism rather than a secularism of institutions.
I'll tell you why I asked this question, because Mr. Modi refers to the practice of secularism today as the burqa of secularism. His party calls it pseudo-secularism. He is, of course, committed to secularism formally. The constitution commits him to that. So will the practice and interpretation of secularism under Mr. Modi be different to what we got used to under UPA and Congress governments?
I mean, I think it is. I mean, I think given the party's history, BJP's history, it'll be different in the sense that it'll have to work harder to, as it were, assuage all Indian citizens that they have a rightful place in this country. So the political work they have to do is much harder. But in terms of institutional practice, I think what he seems to be signaling is that he wants to move away from what we've conventionally known as electoral secularism. Electoral secularism of the kind we have, let's say, seen practiced in UP, where, in a sense, in order to construct electoral alliances, people wear a secular mask, but they do nothing to dismantle the deep structures of prejudice that informs the functioning of our institutions.
Mr. Modi may not wear the mask,
Right.
but he'll dismantle the deep structures.
That's the commitment he is giving, and that's the commitment we should hold him up to.
Now, another element of the Nehruvian consensus that could be under strain or maybe changed by Mr. Modi is the interpretation of federalism.
Right.
We've got used to federalism being interpreted in a way where the centre gets prominence over the states. Mr. Modi comes to power having been a chief minister for 12 years and with a commitment in his manifesto to give a greater role to the states in governance. Do you think we'll see a rebalancing of Indian federalism?
We will see a rebalancing. I think it's the one issue in which he's the most articulate, and I think also the most convincing. The fact of the matter is the states have to do most of the implementation of programs anyway. And the powers they have, particularly fiscal powers they have, the design powers they have on centrally sponsored schemes are nowhere commensurate with their responsibilities. I think that rebalancing is long overdue and will be all for the good. It will encourage competition and experimentation and encourage a sense of participation.
Now, another element of the Nehruvian consensus that could be under strain or maybe changed by Mr. Modi is the stress the Nehruvian consensus laid on planning and on welfare.
Right.
And as you know, the Planning Commission lay at the very core of that.
Yeah.
Often when one hears Mr. Modi's speeches or those of people around him, you get the feeling that maybe the role of the Planning Commission will alter, maybe he'll do away with it altogether. Do you think the stress on planning and welfare will diminish under Mr. Modi?
See, I think there are three big economic transitions we have to undertake, and how we go about them is a second order question, whether the Planning Commission does it or whether it happens to the ministries. The first big transition is the transition from crony capitalism to a rules-based capitalism. That's one of his promises. The second transition, no modern society can dispense with the welfare state. The question is whether the form of that welfare state leads to greater productivity and greater participation in the economy in terms of jobs. And the third transition he has to make is the right balancing between development and environment. We cannot dispense with the environment at all. In fact, it has to be a much higher priority. Now, the question is what architecture is commensurate with producing these three transitions. I don't think it's going to be as simple a matter of he's moved rightward and dispensed with welfare policies. In fact, BJP state governments are actually much more effective at many of those welfare policies.
But the balance again will alter and change. And as that balance alters and changes, whether it's between welfare and productivity, whether it's between development and environment, you'll sense and feel not just a new government, but a new India emerging.
There'll certainly be a new and certainly a new discourse emerging. We'll have to see how effectively they realize it. But I think his constant emphasis on participation, productivity in the future, I think is in a sense very different in tone.
In fact, this in a sense stresses another difference between what people believe he'll do and what the UPA did. The UPA laid a lot of stress on rights-based entitlement policies. Mr. Modi sounds as if he's more interested in empowerment and policies that more immediately bring direct material gain to people.
I think that characterization is correct, except that that doesn't negate the need for welfare. And he's very careful to say that he's not going to actually dismantle welfare programs.
And if he did, it would be a vote loser. Because India is a poor country.
It would be a vote loser, but we also have to clear many of those are actually necessary for the productive dimension of the economy.
But what would happen is the balance between welfare and productivity will change, perhaps more on productivity side, and as a result of that, the language of political communication, the talk of participation rather than entitlement, that too will be changed.
Certainly, the balance will change. I think the design of many of these programs will be changed. It will be changed in terms of what we are trying to achieve through them. And I think the balance of rhetoric, where instead of these programs being the ceiling of what we can aspire to, there will be the floor for what poor people need to stand on to aspire to something higher.
To put it in journalistic terms, if all that happens, as we are discussing, does actually take place, will Mr. Modi look and feel as if he's functioning more like a conservative or a Christian Democrat leader in India, rather than the traditional Jan Sangh background he came from?
I think Mr. Modi will look like Mr. Modi, actually. I think he's a very smart politician, and I think one of the things he's realized is that the standard left-right binaries, as we understand them,
don't work.
Actually do not explain the complicated choices we need to make.
In other words, he's creating a new center.
He's creating a new center. He's trying to articulate a new vision and put together very disparate elements.
At the end of 5 years, if all that we've talked about actually happens, will India be a very different country to what it is today?
If we can get back up to 7 to 8% growth, avoid political violence and social polarization, India will look like a very different country than what it is today. Because I think it can aim much higher than it aims for today.
And that change, in a sense, will be the Modi imprint.
That change will be the Modi imprint, and that will be the test of his success.
Dr. Mehta, let's come to the fate that's befallen the Congress party. It's crashed to just 44 seats, barely 19.6% of the vote, and yet it used to be the party of Mahatma Gandhi. It was the party that brought India to independence. Do you think the Congress party's hold on Indian politics has been shattered, or is that a premature conclusion?
I think it has been shattered. I mean, it'll be a tall order to revive the party, particularly if Mr. Modi does well in government. If there's a crisis in government, certainly it'll give them an opportunity. But I think it's been shattered for two reasons. I think there are two problems with the Congress. One is not just the Congress, actually, the opposition at large, which should worry us as a country. You know, in military, there's a form of marching known as Kadam Tal, where people kind of move their feet up and down and stay in the same place, the same discourse, the same arguments, the same language. I think Congress actually is caught in that sort of ideological trap. I think the second challenge is that there are no challengers in Congress. People are talking about the reform of the party, but reforms of party don't happen by people scripting a reform from the top. They happen when somebody actually challenges and claims power within the party. Congress party doesn't have any challengers.
What do you think is responsible for Congress suffering this debacle?
I think three things. One, I think they misunderstood the nature of their own success in 2009, both in terms of the ideological basis of that success and the social basis of that success. Second, they forgot the golden rule of politics that the world does not stand still, and you cannot, as it were, throw your past achievements to a population that is oriented towards the future. And the third, we have to say, is the complete leadership vacuum in the Congress.
I'll come to the leadership vacuum in a moment's time, but are you also suggesting that under 10 years of UPA rule, the country changed? It moved, as Mr. Chidambaram has once put it, from being a petitioning to an aspirational society, but Congress failed to realize the change that had happened, and therefore Congress remained out of sync with the country, maybe even out of date.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, we did experience an average of 7 years growth rate, which was bound to change the country, but it did not understand the nature of the changes it had itself unleashed.
So Congress actually is, in a very paradoxical way, a victim of its own success. It changed India, but failed to realize it and lost.
That's certainly a large part of that story.
Let's come to this issue of leadership in Congress. The Congress believes that its future lies with Rahul Gandhi. How do you view Rahul Gandhi?
Certainly, I mean, you know, this election, and we said this before the election, he's been a huge disappointment. He doesn't seem to have either the intellectual self-confidence to exercise a leadership role, nor was he able to intuit and diagnose what was going on in people's mind, which is the biggest gift a politician needs. I think he relies too much on outsourcing judgment to God knows whom, and which is not a good sign in a leader.
Are you saying, to put it again in layman's language, that Rahul Gandhi simply isn't cut out to be the leader of a party, leave aside a prime ministerial aspirant?
He will have to undergo a very steep learning curve to prove that he's capable.
Is he capable of undergoing that steep learning curve, of virtually reinventing himself?
You know, history always surprises us. Leaders, you know, in fact, who would have thought Narendra Modi would have reinvented himself the way he has done? Who would have thought that Rajiv Gandhi would have frittered a 400-seat majority? So politics is about contingency and change. But given the evidence we have so far, as I said, it will be a very, very steep learning curve.
In which case, if Rahul Gandhi remains at the apex of the Congress party, projected by them as their leader, and fails to reinvent himself, do you see Congress ever bouncing back?
That's why I said I think the crisis is very, very deep. I mean, they would have to be handed a political opportunity on a platter, something like a deep crisis in this government if Mr. Modi really messes up big time. But failing that, I think it's going to be a tall order for them.
It was the collapse of Janata post 77 that gave Indira Gandhi the opportunity, but Indira Gandhi also was a woman of sterling qualities. You're saying two things. Modi would have to similarly collapse post 2014, but even then, Rahul is not Indira Gandhi.
Rahul is not Indira Gandhi, and even the party organization is not what it was under Indira Gandhi. I mean, she still had a bunch of regional leaders she could count on. Congress has at the moment nothing. Nobody can even stand up and mount a challenge.
Your analysis is making it pretty clear that the odds are heavily stacked against a Congress revival. Are we therefore beginning to see the end of the Gandhi dynasty?
It certainly appears that way. I think you know, as I said, politics is about contingency, but I think the momentum of history is against them.
Two quick questions. How will history view Dr. Manmohan Singh?
I think the simplest way of describing is, when greatness was thrust upon him, he did not fully rise to the occasion.
That makes him sound almost not tragic, but pathetic.
Not entirely. I said fully rise to the occasion. I think he did grasp certain features of India's modernity, particularly I think his international orientation, his orientation to reform in his early days. But he did not discharge his responsibilities as required by the office of the Prime Minister, particularly in the second term.
When you say he didn't fully rise to the challenge, you're also saying he didn't have the qualities the job required. He wasn't fit to be Prime Minister, or at least fully fit.
He did not act as if he were Prime Minister.
In other words, if he had those qualities, he hid them very successfully.
He hid them very successfully.
How would history judge Sonia Gandhi?
That's a harder one. I think, you know, in terms of personal qualities, she has shown incredible courage over the last 20 years and so forth. But I think ultimately the verdict has to be she sacrificed the country to the family, to the interests of the family and the party as she saw it.
And so she'll be remembered as the doting mother who was blinded by the faults of her son and sacrificed her party because she didn't see the faults of her son.
I think that's certainly one element of it, but also I think did not fully understand the changes sweeping India.
But is there not something remarkable about the fact that she was born in Italy, came to India, learnt the language, involved herself in a society that was alien, and then rose to the very top of it to everyone's surprise?
That's why I said, you know, she's an extraordinary example of courage, and to be honest, even now in the Congress party, still stands taller than almost everybody else, which is a remarkable tribute to her.
But despite the incredible achievement of being a foreigner who gets to the very top of the political totem pole in India, she remains disappointing because at that moment of vision, when she should have put her party and the country first, she put Rahul Gandhi ahead.
After 2009, the election was Congress's to lose, and if they had higher aspirations for India, they could have done incredibly well. I think she reminds one of somebody who, as she became more successful, she seems to have become more cut off from, as it were, the requirements of what ordinary citizens were wanting and what India needed at that moment. And that the creation of that structure, perhaps it was motivated by a desire to protect the family, seems to have been Congress's undoing.
That is in fact a sobering verdict. Dr. Mehta, a pleasure speaking to you.
Thank you very much.